Insulin is so important that if you don't have it, you will die. If stress is up, the body is insulin resistant. If inflammation is up, insulin resistance is up. A woman on average will have more body fat than a man, and yet she will be healthier in every way than a man. If a woman is too skinny, we cannot reproduce.
So what do you think then, liposuction?
Yes, I think that liposuction is problematic. Anyone listening will think that Ben is telling a horror story. It's very scary. But if it has been a horror story, it is one with a happy ending.
I'm Dr. Esra Çavuşoğlu, and I've been living a sober life for the past 19 years. My battle with addiction drove me to seek new methods, devices, and supplements to improve my physical and mental performance, enhance my quality of life, and ultimately live healthier for longer. From my experiences in addiction recovery, biohacking, and longevity to the latest global developments, from groundbreaking entrepreneurs to expert academics, the conversations I've had over the years are now featured weekly on Soberhead Podcast. This week on Soberhead Podcast, we dive deep into one of the most misunderstood yet powerful hormones in your body, insulin. My guest, Dr. Ben Bikman, is a professor of physiology and developmental biology at Brigham Young University and the author of the groundbreaking book, Why We Get Sick. Dr. Bikman explains how insulin is not just about blood sugar, it's the master hormone controlling your energy, weight, and long-term health. We uncover how insulin resistance sits at the core of today's chronic diseases, from type 2 diabetes and obesity to Alzheimer's, and how your everyday food choices can either heal or harm your metabolism. He also shares how tracking your glucose with a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, can help you understand how your body truly responds to food, stress, and sleep. Get ready to see your body in a whole new way, because as Dr. Bikman says, the trick is the insulin. This episode of Soberhead Podcast is brought to you with the support of Gedik Foundation for Education. For over 30 years, Gedik Foundation has been providing opportunities for youngsters, children, and women to realize their dreams through scholarships, projects, and social work. And we're proud to be on this journey together. Investing in education is investment in the future. Subscribe and support us in our quest to bring you the most current scientific data and continue your access to the world-renowned experts in their fields as guests on Soberhead, with Turkish translation and completely free of charge. Comment on the episodes, like, and share. Dr. Ben Bikman, welcome to Soberhead Podcast. What an honor. And I really just gave you such a hard time to be a guest of mine because I know you're super, super busy. We're going to talk about something super important for me and for so many people. And I think that there's a misunderstanding of that. So our topic is going to be insulin and things around insulin. Something very interesting that I read, actually, I read your book. You say that, the fundamental problem that proceeds and actively drives the development of most of the chronic illnesses have like one common source, and that's the insulin resistance. So welcome to the podcast. Let's roll. I know that you have a limited time. Tell me, let's start with this, because we're going to get into nitty-gritty detail. But for people to have an understanding, we hear a lot from our blood work these days, blood glucose level, hemoglobin A1C. But it's very rarely that I do myself, my doctors ask me, but I very rarely see on someone's blood work that they're measuring insulin. What is insulin and why do we need it unless you're diabetic?
Insulin is a hormone that comes from the pancreas. So the pancreas is a gland that is located beneath the stomach. Now, in someone with type 1 diabetes, they do not have the right cells or the parts of the pancreas that make insulin. But in the rest of us, insulin is a hormone whose job is throughout the body to tell the body what to do with energy. So insulin has a direct effect on nutrient metabolism in every cell, whether it's time to burn glucose or time to burn fat, whether it's time to store fat, whether it's time to make ketones. Insulin tells the cells throughout the body which of those efforts it should pursue or it's allowed to. But it's important to note that insulin does much more than just control blood glucose. That is just one of its many effects. However, insulin's primary stimulus, or what will elicit an increase in insulin, is blood glucose. So it's very important for people to appreciate that. As you noted in the introduction, much of my work has been to find that insulin resistance, when insulin isn't working particularly well, is a foundation to many, many chronic diseases. And when insulin is too high, it is causing insulin resistance and then contributing to these problems. But it's important for people to remember that insulin affects every single cell of the body.
All right. So you call it a hormone. I didn't know that insulin was a hormone.
Oh, yes. Yes, it's a hormone. A hormone is simply when one cell in one part of the body sends a signal. It's like it's sending a letter, it's mailing a letter from one cell to go to another cell to tell that other cell what to do. And so insulin is coming from the pancreas as a hormone, and then it's going throughout the body telling other cells. It tells the brain what to do with energy. It tells the blood vessels what to do. It also affects fertility in women. It helps determine the amount of sex hormones that her ovaries will produce.
Help us to understand the mechanism. It's like you eat something. So I just eat a piece of something that would spike my...
fried squash.
Okay, let me tell that story then to my audience. I had no idea how my blood glucose level was moving, and levels. There was a company when I was living in the United States, which you're an advisor of it, that I just learned. There was this new company came out, and they say, like, with the CGM, we can measure your blood glucose level after you eat something. And I was so excited, and I consider myself biohacker. So I had that. And I was shocked. I said, because there were a couple of things that I would really love to eat. Like, I wouldn't eat sugar, but I could eat a jar of honey in one sitting. I saw that my blood glucose level is like going so high that there was no more place that arrow would go up. And then I would order some Greek food, like I would say, okay, fried squash, it's vegetable, whatever. And then I would see another spike. It really trained me what to eat, what not to eat. And, for a couple of years, I actually wore it straightforward. Now I'm like, time to time, I'm wearing it because I know what's affecting me. But it's so beneficial to people to understand how their system works.
Yes, totally agree. Right. In fact, that's a good way for me to generally and briefly answer your question. What's the mechanism? As I noted, insulin's primary stimulus, or the signal that will tell insulin to go up, is when blood glucose levels go up. If blood glucose levels are too high for too long, it actually is lethal. It can kill a person. It can result in death because of changes in how the kidneys work, and then how that will change blood pressure and the amount of blood a person has. And so we cannot allow blood glucose to be too high for too long. And so in that role, insulin is acting as a hero. Glucose is going up. It's going to go too high. Insulin will come up, and then it will open the doors of many of the biggest tissues or cells of the body, the muscle cells, the fat cells. Insulin will come and knock on those doors of the cells and tell the cell to open up to allow the glucose to come in. And then that will help the blood glucose to come down, and then insulin will come down. Now, again, insulin does much more than just control blood glucose, but that's the primary signal that turns insulin on. But the problem nowadays, whether it's Turkey, whether it is in the West, it's that it happens too often, and that people, they eat starches and sugars, and they drink juices and soda and soda pop and sugar all day long. And so their glucose is always going up, which means their insulin is always turned on. And the more insulin is turned on, the more the body stops listening to it. There's too much. It's like we are listening to music too loud, and we start to become deaf. This is like what's happening at the cells. The cells are getting so much insulin all the time that they start to become deaf. They don't listen anymore.
What happened then?
Yeah, so then it starts to affect various tissues of the body. So, for example, when the body is insulin resistant, when insulin isn't working very well and insulin levels are too high, then In women, this can start to result in an inability of her ovaries to create estrogen. And so her female sex hormones will not be high enough, and now she cannot ovulate. So she has polycystic ovary syndrome. In a man, we have something kind of similar, where in his body, his blood vessels become insulin resistant, and now he cannot have normal erectile function. Now he also has infertility.
Is it connected to what, like nitric oxide?
Yes, that's exactly right. So insulin, when insulin is working, it stimulates the production of nitric oxide, which allows vasodilation and then normal health in the man. But when the blood vessel is insulin resistant, insulin cannot stimulate nitric oxide, so the blood vessel stays small.
What should be the normal rhythm, let's say, normal rhythm of, because it used to be at some point, very short period of time, maybe not in your world, but in our world, is like your insulin, your blood glucose level should never go up. But now it's like, no, that's not healthy. It should go up when you eat, then come down. What should be the rhythm?
Yeah, that's a very good question. A single spike of blood glucose is not going to do any harm. The problem is more when it just is happening all the time, because glucose levels may come up and then come back down. Let's say someone ate a sandwich with lots of bread, and bread will increase blood glucose considerably. And the blood glucose levels may come down at about 2 or 2.5 hours, but insulin will not come down so fast. It will take longer to come down. And so if a person they eat something like with lots of bread for breakfast at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then before it has time to fully come down, they're now having a snack at 10 a.m. before lunch. And so they bump it all back up. And then they have a big lunch with many carbohydrates. So the more this is happening frequently, the more it's a problem. An individual bump, one single bump up and down, and then it's back again, that's fine. It's just most people do not do that. Most people are having the bumps happening all day long.
How about if we eat, because, we consider certain vegetables also carbs, and actually they're high in carb. And I can see on my CGM that, I don't remember which one, but sometimes it can go up and, like as much as I'm eating a chocolate, let's say.
Yes.
Would the insulin response would be the same, chocolate, whether broccoli or chocolate, or insulin acts differently than the blood glucose?
Well, if something you eat results in an equal increase in glucose, then the insulin result will be the same. But you just happened to mention one of the vegetables that will essentially do nothing. Broccoli has so small of an effect that it's irrelevant. But others, like potatoes or squash, others will have a very, very big effect.
And that big effect, so is it then person to person personalized? Because certain people can eat banana and they don't have that spike, and some other people eat the banana and it spikes. So when the person picks what they eat, is this whole thing is personalized? That's what I'm trying to ask. Yeah. Potato would be the same probably for everyone or whatever, but there's certain stuff that one get affected more than the other.
Yes, that's absolutely true. There was a group from the Middle East that published a paper just a few years ago documenting that based on differences in both genetics and most especially perhaps the microbiome, the bacteria in the intestines, that they were able to that it had a heavy influence on how they responded to things like a banana or ice cream. For example, they had a group eat ice cream and they found a very, very big increase in blood glucose, just like you'd expect. But another group of people could eat that same ice cream and they only had a very, very modest effect. Part of that could be how the microbiome digests the food and how rapidly the person digests it. And then, of course, even how much, and perhaps most especially how much muscle mass a person has, because muscle is a very hungry tissue. It wants to eat a lot of everything. It will eat fat. It will eat glucose very, very well. In fact, when you were wearing your CGM, your continuous glucose monitor, and you notice the glucose come up and then come down, 80% of what's bringing it down is what's going into the muscle. So the more muscle a person has, or the more they can use their muscle after they eat, like going on just a 10-minute walk, then the easier time they will have keeping their blood glucose in control.
You know, some other doctor friend explained me how the system works, but it would be really beneficial for people to understand like what really happens. Like you eat something and then nutrition has to be distributed into the cells, and then, you know, like there's like this rhythm so that your tissues, your muscle, your brain, whatever, everything gets it. If you can share that, because I want to add on another question to that, because that's very important, I guess.
Yeah. I don't use the word rhythm to describe the distribution of energy. Now, there are rhythms. There are rhythms within the body. To be very clear, insulin, in fact, has a rhythm that even if a person eats and drinks nothing, insulin is still going to have subtle changes throughout the day. It will wave through the day. Other hormones do this too. This is very common. Cortisol, growth hormone, they all have a rhythm to them. But with regards to when we eat food and that nutrient or that energy, the calories are used or stored, it will depend partly on the time of day. Like, for example, in the morning when we are waking up, our brains will take in more energy. And that's because we're waking up. It's sort of like the engine in our brain, the metabolic engine overnight was very, very low. But as we start to wake up, it starts to need more energy. We're moving the engine more. We're running it faster. And so it starts to need more fuel. Similarly, you and I are sitting down right now, but if we were to get up and start walking, there would be a change in both blood flow and energy use, so that our muscles are now, right now, our muscle metabolic rate is very, very low. But the moment we start using them, it goes up, it increases considerably. And so every tissue will have its own demand, what we could call a rhythm, where its needs will go up or down. And just as an interesting point for your audience, we often think of tissues like muscle as having the highest metabolic rate. Our kidneys are the busiest organ in our whole body. At any moment, the kidneys are using more energy than any other tissue.
Okay, then let me reformulate my question. What's the process of someone becoming insulin resistant? After what point?
Well, there are two ways for insulin resistance to begin. What I call fast insulin resistance and slow insulin resistance. And I'll be very brief. With fast insulin,
brief. Explain.
Don't be brief. Okay, it is very interesting. With fast insulin resistance, there are three primary causes. Any of these, I could have people from the audience could come to my lab at my university, and I could make them insulin resistant in just an hour or so. Now, it's so fast and when it turns on, but it's also fast when it goes away. And these three things are, stress is one of them. So when the stress hormones of the body, like adrenaline and cortisol, are increased because of anxiety or because of sleep deprivation or any other number of causes, if stress is up, insulin resistance is up. The body is insulin resistant. Next is inflammation. If inflammation is up, then also insulin resistance is up. This can be something like they are sick with the flu or a fever or cold, or they have an autoimmune disease, something more dramatic, then they have insulin resistance. And then the last one is the one I already mentioned because it's the one I think is the most important, which is too much insulin. When insulin is going up too much, the body becomes insulin resistant. Now, all three of those are fast insulin resistance. They can cause insulin resistance quite quickly, and it can go away very quickly. With slow insulin resistance, it is when the problem is starting at the fat cells. And this is the problem that takes, a longer time, years before it becomes a problem. But it also takes a little longer for it to go away. We all know this. And in fact, even between the sexes, male and female, because no matter what some people want to say these days, men and women are very, very different. And one of the ways in which men and women are different is how they store fat. Men will have fewer fat cells than women will. Women will have more fat cells, and women will, on average, be fatter than men. That's by design. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's how God made men and women. Women will have more fat than men, and yet they are healthier than men. And usually we think of fat as being a bad thing, but obviously it's not, because a woman on average will have more body fat than a man, and yet she will be healthier in every way than a man. That's because of the size of her fat cells. And so that's the important part for people to understand. It's not the mass or the amount of fat we have that causes problems. It's the size of our fat cells. And so a person who has fewer fat cells, but they're very, very big, that's a problem. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But a person who has more fat cells, but they're smaller, like in a woman, then that's very healthy, because the size of the fat cell determines the problem. When a fat cell gets bigger and bigger, two bad things start to happen. One, the fat cell starts to reach a point that it cannot grow anymore. It's like a naughty little child who has a balloon, and they are filling the balloon with water to make a water balloon. If they fill the balloon too much, it will burst. And so the fat cell is getting so big that it cannot grow anymore, or it may burst. That would be very, very unhealthy for the body. And so
it does really burst?
No, well, it won't burst. It prevents itself. It stops itself from bursting by becoming insulin resistant. So insulin, this is a whole topic we haven't even discussed, but insulin is the only signal in the body that can make fat cells get big. If you wipe out all insulin, then it does not matter how much a person can eat. They cannot have any fat on their body whatsoever. So, for example, a person with type 1 diabetes, if they decided, and as we started our conversation, a person with type 1 diabetes does not make insulin on their own. They have to inject it. It's now a drug for them. They have to inject it every day. If a person with type 1 diabetes decided that they did not want to take their insulin injection, they could eat 10,000 calories a day, infinity amount of calories, and they could not gain any fat whatsoever. In fact, they could not keep any fat on their bodies whatsoever. They would be very, very skinny, zero body fat. So the fat cell, as it's gotten so big, it tells insulin, I am already too big. I cannot continue to grow even though you want me to, and so I'm not going to listen anymore, and it becomes insulin resistant. At the same time, that's the first problem. The second problem is that as the fat cells are getting so big, they are getting pushed further and further away from capillaries or from blood vessels because they just are too fat. The fat cells are too big. And as the fat cells are getting pushed further and further away from blood vessels, they start to suffocate, or what we say, they become hypoxic. Hypoxic is the word to describe when a cell cannot get enough oxygen. And so in order to correct that lack of oxygen, the really fat cells begin releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines. These are just hormones that start to promote inflammation throughout the body. Now, the fat cell does this because some of these pro-inflammatory hormones will induce or stimulate the production of new blood vessels. And so the really fat cell that's becoming hypoxic is trying to stimulate the growth of new blood vessels so that new blood vessels can start coming to the fat cell to feed it, to give it oxygen. And so as it's spreading inflammation throughout the body, as everyone will remember, inflammation is also one of the causes of insulin resistance. And so the
so that causes that, and that, wow. It's like
so that also starts contributing to more insulin resistance throughout the body. So it starts to feed the problem and make it bigger.
Wow. You know, I heard in one of your talk actually that it's the first time I heard it from you when you were talking about this, like type 1 diabetes, young people who are not using their insulinorexia, and like kind of an anorexia.
Diabulimia is what people call it.
Diabulimia. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Diabulimia.
Yep.
Do you guys see that often?
Thankfully, it's not very often because the person, they will feel like they're dying because they are. Insulin is so important that if you don't have it, you will die. And so a person has to balance this where they say, I want to be very thin, but I don't want to die. And they will be thin if they skip their insulin injections, but they will feel like they're dying.
You were talking about the fat cells, and I'm sure that what's the function of regular size of fat cells for the human body?
Yes, fat cells are very important. There are people who have diseases. It's a disease called lipodystrophy, where they do not make fat cells. They have a genetic mutation where they do not make fat cells. And they look like they are superheroes. They are so lean. You can see every muscle and every blood vessel. They are ripped, as we would say nowadays.
Yeah.
But they are very unhealthy. And they have very bad insulin resistance. They have very bad fatty liver disease. So fat cells are designed to store energy. They're designed to store fat. That's what they're supposed to do. If a person doesn't have fat cells, then the body is forced to store fat in other tissues. Now it's storing too much fat in the muscles or in the liver or in the pancreas. These are tissues that are not meant to store a lot of fat. So fat cells, one just help us store extra energy to use later, but they also make a lot of hormones. Most people don't appreciate this. Fat cells make a hormone called leptin. Now, usually when people hear leptin, they only think of obesity and satiety, that when leptin comes from a fat cell, it goes to the brain and helps us eat less. Yes, that's true, but it has something far more important than that. Leptin is 100% essential for normal fertility. For a woman to ovulate or for a man to make normal sperm, if they do not have leptin, they cannot reproduce. They are infertile. And this is why, especially in women where leptin is even more important, if a woman is too skinny and does not have enough fat, she will not make enough leptin, and then the brain will turn off the ovaries and ovulation will stop. So fat cells are critically important, not only just to survive any time of fasting or starvation, but also just to reproduce. If we don't have fat cells, we cannot reproduce.
So that's why probably people who are anorexic are not able to reproduce. Okay.
That's exactly right.
So what do you think then, people who are doing liposuction?
Yes, I think that liposuction is problematic.
Because it's not like if you do it tiny bit, fine, but people are like trying to solve their problems by like really sucking out lots of
I think a tiny bit would be fine, but people need to remember the number of fat cells is not the problem when it comes to obesity. It's the size of the fat cells. And so when someone is sucking out fat cells, that means there are fewer fat cells left. And if a person keeps eating the same way they did before that put all of that fat on their bodies in the first place, what happens is that all of the remaining fat cells just get a little bigger. So it's no surprise that you can have people undergo liposuction and they can lose 10 kilograms of fat and yet they won't be any healthier. No blood marker looks better. Everything is the same because they did not shrink their fat cells. They just simply removed fat cells. The amount of fat a person has is not the problem. The problem is how big the fat cells are, and liposuction does not shrink fat cells. So a person may look a little better, but they will not be healthier.
Tell me, please explain me. I hear sometimes that people who are having a in normal range blood glucose level or hemoglobin A1C or fasting blood glucose level are really high in insulin. How does that work?
That actually is the earliest stages of insulin resistance, where blood glucose is staying normal, but it's requiring more and more and more insulin to keep it normal. So insulin is having to work harder and harder and harder. So insulin is going up, 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 but it's enough to keep the glucose in check, but it needs more. This is the earliest stages of insulin resistance, when glucose is normal, but insulin is high. But that's part of the problem of the way we practice modern medicine, because we only look at the glucose. Most clinicians don't even think about measuring the insulin. They look at the glucose and they say if glucose is normal, then everything is fine. No, it may not be fine, because insulin is a different marker that needs to be measured.
Anything else happens if you're insulin resistant? So is it besides type 2 diabetes?
Oh, yes, many things. And that's what my book is mostly about. So in Why We Get Sick, I not only discuss where insulin resistance comes from, but also all of the consequences. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease. Yeah. Alzheimer's disease is insulin resistance of the brain, where the brain has become so insulin resistant that it cannot get enough glucose anymore inside of it to give it energy. And so the brain starts to go hungry, and then its function starts to come down.
Oh, wow. Like as if it's like a one big fat cell, your brain, because it's very much, it's a fatty organ, yeah?
It needs much energy. It is an engine that it needs a lot of fuel. It's like a race car. And if it is not getting enough fuel, it starts to sputter. It does not drive very well. And so Alzheimer's disease is very, very linked to insulin resistance. So too is hypertension or high blood pressure, one of the most common heart or cardiovascular problems in the world. Hypertension is mostly caused by insulin resistance, and many other problems as well, skin problems and liver problems, kidney problems. I could go on, but as you noted in the introduction, my whole view is that many, and supported by substantial science, most chronic diseases are caused in some way by insulin resistance. It's the great common cause.
Can you be insulin resistant but not diabetic?
Yes, because type 2 diabetes only happens when the glucose starts to go up. So as you mentioned, as you asked a moment ago, insulin resistance is when, in its earliest way, is when glucose is normal, but insulin is high. And then eventually the body becomes so insulin resistant that even though insulin is high, it cannot keep blood glucose in control anymore. Then when blood glucose starts to go up, now we say they have type 2 diabetes.
All right. Wow, that's so tricky. That's so important then. You know, people should not, first of all, wait until they're diabetic.
Yes.
And number two, it's like so important to measure it, because kind of very related and correlated. You may have some other problems, like you said, and that may be caused straight from insulin resistance. Can you change that back to normal?
Yes, yes.
Or is it like once you're there and you're stuck with it?
No, that is the good news of all of this. So far, anyone listening will think that Ben is telling a horror story. It's very scary. But if it has been a horror story, it is one with a happy ending when we get to the end of it, because you can reverse insulin resistance very quickly. My lab published a paper a couple years ago where we took 11 women who had become so insulin resistant that they now had type 2 diabetes. And within just 90 days, their type 2 diabetes was totally gone. No drugs required.
Wow.
All they did was change what they were eating. And so that's the good news, that a person can just keep 3 rules in mind. Now, the rules are simple, but that does not mean it's easy, because it's hard to make changes in diet. Especially the first rule. The first rule is the hardest, and that is control carbohydrates. We need to stop eating carbohydrates that are coming from bags and boxes with barcodes. Eating whole fruits and vegetables is generally going to be okay. But if it's breads, or if it's cereals, it's crackers or potato chips, no, those are something we have to have less of, because that is increasing our blood glucose a lot, which is increasing our insulin a lot. And the more that happens, the more we have insulin resistance. So rule number 1, control carbohydrates. Bring carbohydrate consumption down. That is the hardest, because it's also the one that people crave. It's the one we are addicted to. That's what we want to eat all the time. But there are two other rules. As much as we control carbohydrates, we want to make sure we prioritize protein, that we are getting more good protein. And the best protein comes from animal sources. So meat or dairy or eggs, those are the best proteins. And then the third rule is don't fear fat. In nature, all protein, there is no exception to this. All protein in nature comes with fat, and that's how we should eat it. When humans eat fat and protein together, we digest the protein better than if we just eat protein alone. That's something important, that too many people are still afraid of fat, but that fat comes with protein very often, and that's how we should eat it. So control carbs, prioritize protein, don't fear fat.
They kind of are afraid of protein as well. Actually, my next question was going to be two items. One is protein, because there's some also talks out there that, high protein diet can elevate your blood glucose level and therefore your insulin. Number two is what are your thoughts about artificial sweeteners?
So number one, about protein. In people with type 2 diabetes, it has been shown that protein can increase glucose, but in non-diabetics, it has little to no effect. And so my view on it is that it is a little personal, that if a person finds that their blood glucose level, that they are controlling carbs, but if they see that their blood glucose levels are still very high, then it might be worth bringing down the protein a little bit. And then with regards to sweeteners, in general, there are so many sweeteners nowadays that it's impossible for me to review all of them. But in general, my view is quite favorable, that I would rather eat something or drink something with a sweetener than sugar. I don't want the sugar. Every sweetener will have a much, much less or no effect whatsoever on blood glucose compared to just sugar. And now there are some that I think are better than others. To me, the ones that are the best, stevia always seems to be very, very good. Monk fruit extract is very, very good. And then allulose is a rare sugar. It's not called artificial, but it comes from things like figs, and it has also no effect on glucose. So many sweeteners I think are very, very good, and I would say they're better than sugar.
Yeah, I think so too, but there's also, they scare you saying like, well, your brain takes this, like the signal, and then they think that they're eating sugar, therefore you will crave more sugar.
No, that's a good point. In fact, I think that's also important to know that some people might respond differently. There was a preclinical study that was published a couple years ago, and they found that the glucose response to a sweetener would depend quite heavily on the gut microbiome, that some people may respond differently. And so my view on this is that if a person drinks or eats something, usually drinks with a sweetener, if they are very hungry after, that's probably bad news. That means that you should not take that sweetener. However, if a person is able to drink, a different person can drink that thing and not be hungry at all, and they're perfectly fine. That means they probably are not having a metabolic response to the sweetener and are okay to continue to take it.
Someone who listens to us or watches us within the couple of weeks that we're going to air this, if they are suspicious or if they want to know if they're having the signs, early signs or late signs of the insulin insensitivity, are there any physical like marks on you, or what would you feel, like energy, whatever, anything that you can pay attention to?
Oh, yes, for sure. In fact, you mentioned marks. It's funny for a person like me with all of my freckles to talk about marks, on the skin. But yes, there are some signs, especially around the neck. The collar line, particularly around the back of the neck. There are two things that someone can look out for. The first one is called skin tags. Skin tags are like small little mushrooms almost. They're small little, they look like a little mushroom of skin just popping up from the skin. And they'll usually come together, just like mushrooms would in the ground. They will come together, and they may see them at certain spots around the neck. They can also happen around the armpits as well. So little skin tags, little teeny mushrooms of skin. That's the first one. And then the second one also coincidentally is around the collar line of the neck, particularly the back. And that is a problem where the skin starts to get a little darker in color, and the texture, the touch of the skin changes, where the skin around that area will start to become like as if we take paper and crumple up the paper and then spread it back out. It becomes very crinkled. This is a problem called acanthosis nigricans. So skin tags and then the dark crinkled skin, those are two problems that if a person has seen them around the neck or around the armpits, it is very, very strong evidence that a person has insulin resistance. Now, a person may not have those, but the other thing I could say is that if they have high blood pressure, that's very likely a sign of insulin resistance.
Oh, wow. Okay. People are going to have a lot of takeaways from this.
Yeah, and insulin resistance is the most common health problem in the world. So it doesn't matter whether it is in Turkey or in the U.S., the average person has insulin resistance nowadays.
What should be the levels? Not higher than this, but not lower
if they measure insulin?
Yeah.
And we want insulin levels to be, if a person's fasted insulin level is less than 10, just to keep it very simple, that's good. That's a good sign. If a person's fasted insulin level is in the teens, below 20, that's okay, maybe. Maybe they have measured their insulin at a high point because, as I said earlier, insulin will come up and down throughout the day. And maybe they measured it at a high point. And so in the teens, that's maybe warning, maybe a problem. If it's 20s and above, then absolute problem. Red light, warning, it's too high.
Anything for like a low level? Like below this?
Yeah, it can't be. It can. There are people who can have insulin at 1 or 2 and they are perfectly healthy. What's very, very important to know, the way insulin is measured when in the numbers that I'm saying now, 1 or 2 or 10 or 20, that is in a units called micro units per mil. So sometimes if someone sees that their insulin is 1 or 2, they say, oh my gosh, it's so close to 0. Not really, because we're using micro units, and we could even go smaller. If I said to a person that you have 5,000 pico units per mil, if I just use a different metric or a different unit, then that sounds suddenly very, very high. And so a person who does not have type 1 diabetes, they do not have to worry about their insulin levels being too low. It will not be too low.
Okay, so because it would produce, so therefore, which is all right. How do you feel about ketogenic diet, and can we be without carbs ever? Like vegetable, but like without grains. Can we live without it?
Oh, yes, certainly. Now, I'm not telling someone that they have to do this, but within human nutrition, if we look back at the 3 macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that I described earlier, if you look at fats, there are some fats that humans must eat to survive. They're called essential fats. They have to eat them. Also with protein, there are such things as essential amino acids, or the building blocks of proteins, that a person must eat. We cannot make them on our own. We must eat them to survive. Then if you look at carbohydrates, there is no such thing as essential carbohydrate. There is nothing from a plant that a human must have. Now, that does not say, I'm not saying that means all plants are unhealthy. I'm not saying that. But I am saying a human does not need to eat carbohydrate, that there is nothing essential about it. So a person could decide to never eat a carbohydrate again. No grain, no vegetable, no fruit, and just focus on meat and eggs and dairy and be perfectly healthy.
Okay, that's good to know. Because, these days, I eat a fair amount of protein, and I get almost criticized from people around me, oh, how much protein you eat. And it's so confusing out there.
Well, and they're wrong. We have a very strange world culture right now where we look at the one thing we don't need as the most important, where people will say, you need as big salad, you need more fruits and vegetables. No, we don't. There's nothing in there that we need. Now, again, I'm not saying we should not ever eat them, but why have the one thing we don't need be the one thing that we eat the most of? We should focus on the things we need, and that's protein and fat.
besides sugar, are there other items in our dietary consumption that are also as bad as sugar-like products to create this insulin problem?
Yes. In fact, just very simply, if someone's eating foods that are coming from a bag or a box with a barcode, that is going to be very, very problematic.
How do you feel about calorie in, calorie out approach?
Right. So we have the traditional view nowadays of obesity to understand why a person is getting fatter or how a person is getting thinner is to only look at the calories. And so a person who is overweight, they will be told you need to eat less and exercise more so that you can be in a deficit or negative calories every day. Well, that is a very good way to become very hungry. And in the US, for many years, there has been a game show called The Biggest Loser.
Yeah.
This is when they take people who are very obese and they have them lose very much weight very quickly by almost starving them, very, very little food, but intense exercise. And it's incredible. They lose an incredible amount of weight and you never see them again, because they gain it all back every time. And that's because that approach of low calories promotes significant hunger. And if your weight loss view is based on hunger, then hunger will always win and you will end up eating it all back. So you need to have a different approach. And my suggestion is lower insulin. As I noted earlier, in type 1 diabetes, a person could stop taking insulin altogether and it becomes impossible for them to store fat on their bodies. So my lab has published reports finding that when insulin comes down, the metabolic rate of fat tissue goes up by 3 times in humans. So a huge increase in metabolic rate in the fat cells and a big increase in metabolic rate in the whole body. Dr. David Ludwig, who is a professor and a physician, a scientist at Harvard, he published papers finding that if people ate meals in the day that kept their insulin low, their metabolic rate, they would spend about 1,000 calories more per day than if they were increasing their insulin all the time. So there is a huge metabolic advantage if you just control your carbohydrates, and when you do eat, you eat more protein and fat instead of carbohydrate, then you allow your insulin to stay low. You don't have to be hungry. Indeed, if you're hungry, eat, but let it be protein and fat, not so much carbohydrate. That allows your insulin to be low.
The trick is the insulin then. Oh, that's good to know.
The trick is the insulin. Yep. So the better way for weight loss is to not count the calories, but to just keep your insulin low by controlling your carbohydrates. When insulin comes down, the body just starts burning more fat.
So then I would ask about GLP-1s because they take our insulin down. Yeah.
Yeah. So GLP-1 primarily acts by making someone not hungry. They just don't want to eat anymore. That's how it primarily works. But the problem is it starts to work less and less well. So a person needs to take more and more and more of the hormone. And so eventually in the US, a paper was published about 1 year ago, I think, where they found that 70% of people who start taking GLP-1 at 2 years, they just decide they don't want to be on it anymore and they get off the drug. And of course, what happens? They gain it all back. But another report was published that found that with the GLP-1 weight loss, up to 40% of the weight they lost was coming from fat-free mass. So not fat. So almost half of what they were losing was not coming from their fat at all, which includes muscle and bone. And so when the person gets off the drug, they go back to eating how they used to eat. Now the fat will come back very quickly, but the muscle and bone may never come back.
So that was not a good idea. So basically you're saying, Esra, you can go and eat 2,500 grams of meat, just meat, and that calorie is not going to make you gain weight because it's going to be a low insulin nutrition.
Yeah, the more a person is eating just protein and fat, the harder and harder it becomes to keep fat on the body.
No, that's great. I know that you have a very limited, only few minutes. My last question then to you would be, what would be your, if you have a couple of suggestions, people who are watching, do this, do never do that. Actually, we spoke, but as one last message, kind of scare them and also motivate them.
Yes, yes. I would say the simplest advice I could give someone is to try to control the ends of the days. So in the morning, do not eat carbohydrates for breakfast. If you want to eat breakfast, eat protein and fat. Do not start your day by spiking insulin, because that can begin an entire day of snacking and being hungry again and snacking more. So in the morning, do not eat carbohydrates. And then also, before you go to bed, within about 3 hours of bedtime, no carbohydrates. You do not want to go to bed with blood glucose elevated. So if a person's wearing their CGM, like how we started our conversation, if they go to bed and they are hyperglycemic, lots of glucose, they will sleep very badly. Their heart will be beating harder and faster. Their body temperature will be higher, so they will be uncomfortable and sweaty while they are trying to sleep. So control your morning and your nighttime. And if you want to eat carbohydrates, if you want to indulge, have it at lunchtime.
So, maybe it would be a good thing for people. They see me often wearing my CGM in certain pictures, especially in the summer. So basically, it may be a good idea for someone to wear it for a month and see how their life is.
I am an enormous advocate of CGM for the reasons you just mentioned. When someone puts on a CGM, they learn what is happening to their body. And then they don't need someone like Benjamin or Ezra telling them what to do. We are saying, don't eat this, don't eat that. When they have a CGM on, they see what happens. They don't like what they see, and then they start making changes on their own.
Thank you so much for your time. That was amazing. And I think it's going to be another hit. I had a program with Nathan Bryan on nitric oxide, and that really went so well because people really want to know, like from the expert, a very specific item or things that happening to their body. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, Ezra. May we someday meet in Turkey. It is a dream of mine to come to Istanbul. Someday I will.